But as far as the Francis side of the equation, would he be more than willing to go to the table, you think?
Oh, 100%. I think this is more about business than it is about ego. At least it is from Francis's side. You know, he wants the opportunity to be paid for, like, it's like being an independent contractor, you know, like your services to be paid the highest amount for whoever needs your services for. He doesn't want to be stuck in a position where he's not allowed to go box or he's not allowed to go do these things. But he went out and did those things, and he competed, and he made a lot of good, you know, a lot of money, and proved that he could do it. So now where does his motivations come from, right? It's not about money, it's about competition. So, and the best competition's in the UFC. I think Dana is a smart enough businessman that it's not about his ego, it's about what's best for his company. And I think that a guy like Dana is level-headed enough to say, like, look, like, the past is the past, and we can get through those things. If these things can work out for us in the future, why not? Why not explore those options? Because I mean, look at the heavyweight division right now, bro. What's going on, right? You got this poor guy in Tom Aspinall has been holding on to an interim belt for almost 600 days now. Like, what are we doing here? You know, so, and I'm not saying that Francis is the answer, but it at least adds some more value to your heavyweight division if you go out and get a guy like him and bring him back, and, you know, let bygones be bygones. Everybody's making money, everybody's happy, but it gets things moving.
It's so crazy, dude. The heavyweight division can be saved by the two fighters that Jon Jones ducked. Francis Ngannou willing to come back opens up more options for some big fights at heavyweight, and that leads to a better TV deal for the UFC. So I don't know if they'll just decline Ngannou fighting there. With Jon Jones talking about how he doesn't care about the Tom Aspinall fight and he's hinting at retirement, it is actually pretty interesting. Where Jon Jones feels like he has all the power, the UFC is doing everything that he wants. He has so much leverage, and while he believes he's dictating everything about this fight, out of nowhere comes Francis Ngannou. And Jon Jones could be the third man out. He could be the one that the UFC doesn't need anymore. They have Tom Aspinall versus Francis Ngannou. Now they don't need Jon Jones. It'd be great to have Jon Jones, but they don't need him for this TV deal. And as Ngannou is willing to walk in, Jon Jones is all like, wait, hold on. Throws his name in the hat. He wants to be part of the fight now. I'm hearing Francis Ngannou is still interested. Now we're talking. That's a real super fight. A clash of champions, not just hype. Now he wants to fight again. And he's trying to butter up Ngannou for a fight against him, because he most likely knows that Francis could be more interested in fighting Tom Aspinall. Jones really wants this fight, but Ngannou knows how these negotiations go with Jon Jones. He's been through them before. The fight went absolutely nowhere. Then he defended against Rogan. He got a crazy deal with the PFL. Had one fight over there and nearly tanked their entire promotion. And that's the other thing too. He is still in contract with the PFL. He has multiple more fights with them. Can they afford those fights though? One fight nearly destroyed their entire MMA promotion. A second one would put it in the grave. Where they're going to tell him, no, you can't fight in the UFC. Then Ngannou will say, okay, then give me a fight. Which most likely is in the contract that they have to give him a certain number of fights a year. They would have to let him go to the UFC. Unless the contract says something different, I don't think they could trap him with a contract. So it's essentially up to the UFC signing Francis. We know Dana and Francis don't like each other, but Eric Nicksick said Francis is still willing to fight there and set emotions aside. He just wants to fight the best in the world. He had life-changing money from one boxing fight, and he had two of them. Then the Renan Ferreira fight that just tanked PFL. Ngannou doesn't need any more money. He wants to fight the best, and the best is Tom Aspinall or Jon Jones, right? So those are the two guys that he's most interested in. And we have to hope that Francis sees eye to eye with Tom Aspinall here, because these two guys were both ducked by Jon Jones. They both know how it is to try to get the Jones fight. It's not easy, and it's never happened for either of them. Aspinall and Ngannou tried to get the Jones fight, and it never happened. So maybe in some kind of alliance, they get together, they fight each other, and it would be successful for the UFC. They don't need Jon Jones now. They don't need to give him all this leverage and power that influences their TV deal, which is like the most important thing for them right now. The TV deal is such a priority. They needed that big fight. Now they're probably going to be talking about Ngannou versus Jones, as well as Ngannou versus Aspinall. They're going to be thinking about both of those fights, but it's essentially going to be up to the fighters and who they want to fight, because honestly, they both do very well. I think Jones versus Ngannou is still a bigger fight for the casual fans. Jones has more casual fans than Aspinall. If Jones is defending his title against Ngannou, just do away with the whole division, bro. Like, what is it there for? The integrity of the sport is just dead at that point. What would the sport even be after that? And there could be a marketing tool to have Jon Jones defend his belt against Ngannou. It looks better as a main event. I mean, we already saw him fight Stipe after Aspinall defended his interim title. I wouldn't be surprised if they did the same thing with Jones versus Ngannou. But if they're going to do that fight, Aspinall needs to be the undisputed champion. That's the least that the fans are asking for. The least that they're asking for is just integrity for this division. Let's have Tom Aspinall be the champion, and then Jones can fight these other guys. That's fine. That's literally the least that everybody's been asking for. Jones could go fight Ngannou while Aspinall defends his title. But this is what Jon Jones had to say about Ngannou coming to the UFC. He was very excited about it. So he said, I'm hearing Francis Ngannou is still interested. Now we're talking. That's a real super fight. A clash of champions, not just hype. He held the UFC belt. I've defended mine for over a decade. Two kings from different roads. Not just one legend facing a mouth that's hot right now. Wait, what? Did he just call Tom Aspinall a mouth that's hot right now? That's some Jones terminology right there. It's crazy how he thinks Aspinall's such a mean guy. Like, hello, John, is like a nightmare for Jones to hear. But two real legacies colliding. That's the kind of fight that actually adds something special to my story, at least from my point of view. Yeah, he really wants the Ngannou fight. But it's crazy because, again, they tried this before. This is not the first time Jones said that he wanted to fight Francis Ngannou. Last time they did this, the fight never happened. And they were sitting there negotiating for so long. And Ngannou was like, okay, I'm done with this. Let me fight Ciryl Gane. Then he left the UFC later. Jones said back in 2020 that the UFC didn't want to meet his wants, essentially. The negotiations went on and off. He even talked about it. He was very dissatisfied with the negotiations against Ngannou. This is what he says, quote, currently in negotiations with the UFC as we speak. Before even discussing numbers, the UFC was unwilling to pay more for the Francis super fight, / for me to move to heavyweight. They said I could possibly earn more in pay-per-view buys. Then he also says in that same day, it's been fun, you guys, maybe I'll see you all in a year or two, which wasn't true. You know, it didn't take him 1 or 2 years. It took him 3 years. That's in 2020. His next fight was against Ciryl Gane in March of 2023. The guy literally waited 3 years longer than that, and that was after Ngannou left. Okay, I'm just guessing. I don't know if this is the reason why Jones wants to fight Ngannou now, but according to Ariel Helwani, they accepted to pay Jones a lot of money to fight Tom Aspinall. So Jones might be trying to transition that to the Ngannou fight. He probably thinks that the UFC is going to pay him a lot of money to fight Ngannou, and therefore wants to fight him. But will the UFC in fact sign Ngannou and get that fight that Jones wants? Normally he would not. When Dana does not like a fighter, he would never sign them again. And because Ngannou's return can be very successful for the UFC, they could re-sign him. Now outside the UFC, Ngannou's not a big superstar. He drew nothing in the PFL, nothing in boxing. Those fights are under 100,000 buys. I don't know about the Joshua fight though. The Joshua fight could have been big, especially in Europe, but the Fury fight was not big in the United States, and neither was the PFL. But in the UFC, Ngannou draws decently, especially for his return against Tom Aspinall, who's more popular than ever. That could be a big fight. And in that big fight, they don't need Jon Jones. So it's very interesting. And I think Ngannou could do well against both guys. But how many times do you think Ngannou would fight in the UFC? I think no more than 2. I think 2 is the maximum amount of fights that he's willing to do. He just wants to fight the best. And the number 1 contender is the guy he already beat. Although I think Gane beat him, but he won the fight. It was close. I think he only wants to fight Aspinall or Jones. Can you imagine? He takes the Jones fight first. And let's say the fight gets put together and Ngannou knocks Jones out. He calls out Tom Aspinall for a fight later in that year. That would be so insane. I don't know if he would beat Aspinall because we don't even know if he's in his prime anymore. But, I mean, he would beat 100% the greatest heavyweight of all time if he beat both of them. Even if he just beats Jon Jones, you could argue he's the greatest heavyweight of all time. I can see him beating Jones, but the Tom fight I think is more difficult. Because I don't think the Jones that fought Stipe is in his prime. And Aspinall absolutely is. And I think that would be the difference between those 3 fighters. Now, if Tom beats Ngannou, that could be the win that gets Jones to fight him. Maybe Jones does think that Aspinall just doesn't have the legacy, and a win against Ngannou would be huge. Enough for Jones to not have any of these legacy excuses anymore. Because he is willing to fight Ngannou. Would he then fight the guy who beat Ngannou? That would be interesting. And on top of that, there'll be his second title defense. He'll be 1 win away from tying Stipe with 3 consecutive title defenses. I would say maybe 2 more wins and you can argue he's the greatest heavyweight of all time. Not definitive. There will be a debate between him, Stipe, and Fedor. He already beat Pavlovich, Volkov, Blade, Spivak, Tibora. Then let's say he beats Gane. Then he beats Almeida. You can argue at that point he's the greatest heavyweight ever. But let's say Jones fights him after Ngannou and Tom beats him too. Forget it. He's the greatest of all time, dude. Beat Jones and Ngannou, 3 title defenses. He would beat 7 contenders in the top 10. I say at that point, he would be the greatest heavyweight. So very interesting move here. If Ngannou returns to the UFC and the UFC actually re-signs him, they want him back. It opens up new options for the UFC and the fighters at the top there. Because if Jones fights Ngannou, that means Aspinall's going to fight Ciryl Gane most likely. And then maybe if Ngannou beats Jones, he will fight Aspinall after. Of course, Aspinall being the undisputed champion. Or if Ngannou fights Aspinall, Jones retires, then Ciryl Gane can have a rematch with Alexander Volkov, who should have won their fight. Or he can fight Jailton Almeida, something like that. Any number 1 contender fight against the winner of Aspinall and Ngannou. Ngannou returning can actually revive the heavyweight division. Now we just have to see if the UFC re-signs him.